The agenda is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. Election day in the U.S. Voters in the world's sole superpower are casting their ballots. 4 more years of Obama or a change spelled Romney. A lot of political nail-biting today. That and more on my agenda. It's time to talk. The campaign is over. President Obama and his opponent, Mitt Romney, now await the voters' verdict. Today, we'll peer into the White House crystal ball and talk about the impact of this historic day. A transition of power will come this week, if not in the U.S., then definitely in China. A new generation is about to take control. On Thursday, the Communist Party Congress convenes a benediction for Hu Jintao and his peers, and a political dawn for Xi Jinping and young leaders. Should the world fear or welcome this changing China? And in Turkey, a struggle for political recognition and respect is claiming lives again. 700 dead this year in clashes between Kurds and Turkish soldiers. After decades of conflict and stalemate, is a peaceful bridge possible between Ankara and the country's Kurdish minority? Well, I've invited 3 people today to talk, argue, and pry apart these headlines. My first guest says that the plight of the Kurds is not much better than when they were dubbed mere mountain Turks. Very nice name there. I'm happy to welcome Bilgin Ayata, a political scientist at the Free University here in Berlin. Bilgin, you've studied the Kurdish conflict extensively. Tell me, does the Turkish identity, does it allow room for being Kurdish?
For the longest time of the history of the modern Republic of Turkey, it did not allow for that. This is why, since 30 years, there is this conflict brutally being lived out, and a very large Kurdish movement is fighting exactly in order to change that.
All right, we're going to talk about that struggle in just a moment. My second guest says that China's Communist Party's biggest challenge ahead may be the corruption within. I'm happy to welcome to the show Hao Yi. He is a correspondent with DW. He's covered China for about 10 years. And Hao, you also were born in China. This freshman class of leaders that is now about to take power, does it have what it takes to clean up the party and at the same time keep China's economic boom alive?
I do think the Chinese economy is a self-runner. The party has to save their reputation, and they do need urgently a legitimacy for the society of the public.
Yeah, legitimacy, a big buzzword right now when people talk about China. We're going to talk about that in just a second as well. And my next guest is here today to talk U.S. politics and the election. No big surprise there. Courtney O'Donnell is with us. She was a White House aide in the office of the Vice President. And Courtney, you were inside at the beginning of the Obama administration. Now we're talking about a possible second term. What do you think will determine the outcome later today?
Well, the only poll that matters is the polling Americans do at the voting booth today. So today it's all about GOTV getting out the vote.
All right. We're going to talk about how that vote has been gotten out, and we're going to do some predicting ourselves in just a moment. You know, one of the things about the American political system that many people would like to see the next president and the next Congress fix is the campaign calendar. Now, a candidate for the White House has to have the endurance of a legion of marathon runners. I mean, this campaign has been going on for 18 months now, and it feels like 18 years. And the only reprieve came last week when a monster named Sandy shut down the Northeast. Well, now finally, the candidates can enjoy a rare moment of calm before the ballot counting begins.
One of these 2 candidates is on the cusp of victory, the other on the verge of defeat. It's a long road to the White House, and U.S. voters now have to decide whether Barack Obama or Mitt Romney will guide the country over the next 4 years. Domestic issues like employment, or the lack of it, will play a decisive factor in which way the vote goes. The unemployment rate in the U.S. remains high, despite some signs of economic recovery. Then there's health care, a major bone of contention. Romney says if he wins, he'll overturn Obama's health care reform, which makes health insurance mandatory for everyone. And education funding is a big issue. With university fees higher than ever before, many Americans now feel a college education has become a privilege that only the wealthy can afford. The candidate they feel has the right answer to these and other questions will occupy the White House till 2016.
So, Courtney, what do you think? Even if Obama wins today, hasn't he really blown it? All that energy, that enthusiasm that we were talking about 4 years ago, it's gone.
I would disagree. I mean, absolutely. I think that President Obama came into office in an extremely challenging time as the country was facing pretty much an economic depression. He was inherited 2 wars. He's responsibly gotten us out of Iraq, getting us out of Afghanistan. And if you look today, obviously these are tough times for Americans, and yes, people are struggling, but you see there's a positive momentum. The recent job reports, the consumer confidence rising, some of the really good trends we see in manufacturing. So,
how do you explain, Courtney, that it was really a once-in-a-lifetime feeling that we had in 2008, and the economy? I mean, we were on the verge of a depression then. Things were worse then than they are now, and yet you had that enthusiasm, and things are somewhat better now, and yet the mood in the country is really bad.
Right. I think the mood, I think a lot of Americans are still struggling, and I think what we've seen is Americans questioning politicians broadly and seeing the conflict in Washington and becoming frustrated. Yet I do think the optimism is still there. I think President Obama has said you can't govern on hope alone, and every day he's come in and had to make tough decisions. But I've also seen in the White House people come in every day working as hard as they possibly can to make a difference for Americans, and I think
is that communicated? Do you think Obama gets the job done in conveying to the American people that he and his staff are working 24 hours a day?
I think that's something that's improved in the recent years as we're looking at cases of people who are now receiving health care who weren't prior to the Obamacare legislation, or students who are now benefiting from the Pell Grants that have been expanded under Obama's administration, and other stories of middle-class families who are feeling some of the benefits of the tax breaks, other veterans who are coming back and benefiting from things like increased money and attention given to the post-traumatic stress disorder and other cases.
You're going through a laundry list of things that Obama has done right, promises he's kept. I mean, we've got the bailout of the auto industry to talk about. We do have health care reform. We've got repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I mean, he has kept a lot of promises. And that, you would think, would be reason enough to reelect him. And yet that's not where we are today. We don't have a landslide victory that we're predicting. And it's because unemployment remains high. And I was looking at past elections. No president since Franklin Roosevelt has been reelected when the unemployment rate was as high as it is today, about at 8%. So if the president is reelected today, he will be doing something unprecedented in the last 70 years. Do you think Americans expect too much from the president when it comes to maintaining the health of the economy?
I think President Obama would say it takes all of us, and I think most Americans that look to the government to support the American dream, and especially if you're a middle-class family, that the government does play an active role in ensuring that you'll be able to send your children to great schools and have the benefit of your generation outpacing the one that came before. And I think also, President Obama recognizes that there's a role for the private sector to play, there's a role for government to play, and there's a role for communities to play. So I think that hope still exists. These are hard times for many Americans, but the hope does still exist.
And the hope is still palpable outside of the United States. I mean, I'll pull in the others here, too, to talk about what the rest of the world is hoping to see happen today. But polls around the world show that non-Americans would overwhelmingly re-elect Obama. And that has everything to do with what? His foreign policy? It's not what he's doing at home, is it?
No.
What do you think?
Foreign policy is made because from the Chinese point of view, the Chinese government never says before who is going to win. He never publicly says who is going to support. They never comment about any democracy, especially in the United States. And I do believe that the foreign policy never wins. Never president wins the pool presidency because of the foreign policy.
Right, it's always about domestic
yes,
politics.
Domestic, like job opportunity, healthcare, or budget cuts and something like issues.
Bilgin, how do you explain, though, the lasting appeal that Obama has in the world?
Well, I mean, he came with, he made a very good entry, let's say, and especially for the Middle East, it was very important when he was elected. After warmongering by Bush, it was very important, the messages of peace or dialogue that Obama was giving. Now, after 4 years, as you said quite rightly, some of the hopes have not fulfilled, but still, compared to Romney, I think, especially when we think about the issue of Iran, of a potential or possible intervention in Iran that is still there, the issue of Syria and the entire restructuring of the region, this election is very important. It's vital.
Is there a concern, particularly in the Middle East and the Arab world, that a Romney White House would be more willing to let conflicts become wars?
The issue of foreign policy was not a major campaign debate, right? It wasn't.
Although the presidential debate about foreign policy was the most interesting one.
It was, that is true.
And the ratings were the highest.
Absolutely, but when you compare to the last elections, it played a much less of a role this term. And one of the few things, I think Romney said that he will improve the ties with Israel a little bit stronger and focus also a little bit more with ties with Europe. All this are a little bit of hints that do make people nervous in the Middle East about, particularly again, when looking at about potential developments in Iran, which will affect the entire region, obviously.
Yeah. Courtney, let me put you back in. You were a member of the first Obama administration. How would a second-term Obama administration look?
Well, I think President Obama would continue to work every day just as hard as he has been for middle-class Americans. And I do think obviously, immediately after the election, our country, America, is facing some serious financial complex challenges. I think he will continue to try to work across the aisle to face those challenges. And, his focus is on jobs. This election has been about the economy. And I think he will continue to work to drive forward the American economy. He's spoken at great length about investing in education and innovation, about funding community colleges to match sort of the labor skills gap we see with new industries. And how do you take unemployed or underemployed people and really give them the skills they need to adapt to this changing economy.
Do you think we'd actually see more accomplished since the straitjacket of re-election on the horizon would be removed?
I think we'd see more accomplished because I think it needs to be accomplished for our country, and I think
we know that. But let's talk about the realities of politics. He's not up for re-election anymore if he wins today. That's like the chains being taken away, right?
Right, but I don't think he acted as if he had chains on, and I think he worked to deliver what he campaigned for the first time around. I don't think you see that much of a distinct difference between what he stood for and what he worked towards every day. But obviously there are political realities. It's a divided, the Congress is, working with Congress will be essential to driving forward all of these plans. And I think that's why a Romney administration is so frightening for those of us who really care about things like access to universal health care, equal pay for women, also a host of women's and social issues. So,
I was going to pick up on this point about how the campaign was conducted. It's been a very ugly campaign. And didn't Obama come in, wasn't part of the enthusiasm was that he was going to clean campaigns up and bring civility to the campaigns. But it just, it seems like that was lost, right?
I don't know that it was lost. I think campaigns are, at the end of the day, about conflict and contrast. And I think it was important for each candidate to showcase their record, showcase who they are. And I think when President Obama had a chance to do that, specifically look at his Democratic Convention speech, I mean, that really was shaping who he is, his ideals, extremely positive. But, this is also Governor Romney was running on his record as a business leader. Yeah. And I think that you need to look at what he did at Bain Capital. It was trying to return money to shareholders, not necessarily to create jobs for those in question, which is so critical here.
We need to move on, but I wanted to ask all three of you something that a lot of people have said the Democrats kind of were too easy on is Romney's religious affiliation. He is a Mormon. And he had a position in the church that is comparable to a cardinal or a bishop in the Catholic Church. And some people say if a Catholic had run for president and had been a cardinal, that would have been an issue. People would have talked about it. And it wasn't in this case. Did Romney get off too easily when it comes to his religious affiliation?
I mean, I think there are a variety of reasons religion didn't play as big of a role as some people thought it may have. I think President Obama didn't want to make it an issue. I think for Americans, they have a variety of opinions on religion.
But it could have been a valid issue, though. Someone could have said, what type of responsibility does he have to his church that is a lot more binding than other religious.
I think the vision and values of the candidate are what was most concern to voters, and I think that was agreed.
I can tell you're from the Obama camp. What do you two?
But I have to say, the Mormon the religion situation is in United States very difficult. I read a number which is 40 million members of his religious group worldwide. So it's still a minority. I don't think this his belief will change the end of the campaign.
Okay, yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, I'm much more concerned about Romney's links with the business community more than with the church. So I'm fine with that.
But sometimes business and politics, they like to mix like a stiff drink. All right.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, well, let's move on. Whoever wins the White House will have to deal with a China that is growing in economic, political, and military influence. Now, Romney has already promised to declare China a currency manipulator on his first day in office if he becomes president. President Obama wants a policy of engagement that allows Beijing and Washington to become partners more than rivals. Well, none of these strategies is a winning bet right now because China is in the midst of one of its most important political power transfers ever. And the new leaders will undoubtedly remind us at some point of their own new strategy.
China's Communist Party is preparing to hold its Congress. There, the successor to President Hu Jintao will be announced. Most experts believe that will most likely be Vice President Xi Jinping. The next generation of leaders in Beijing will oversee a period where the true extent of the country's power will become apparent. China is beginning to stretch its military muscles. A dispute with Japan over some uninhabited islands in the East China Sea is a reminder of Beijing's ambitions as a Pacific power, ambitions that have increased friction with the U.S. and its neighbors. China is also an economic powerhouse, but increasing industrial unrest there has shown that there are serious unresolved tensions. What can the Chinese people and the world expect from its new leadership?
How are we truly looking at a new China, or is that just wishful thinking here in the Agenda studio?
It's not actually a new China. They are actually new faces of the party leadership, because there's not like a U.S. election would be maybe a new government or new party. It's still the same party, but with new faces.
So no change?
I don't believe it.
That is very cynical and disappointing to hear.
Yeah. See, we were waiting for the political reform in China since about more than 30 years. What we see, there is still one ruling party state, and the party, I mean, there is kind of election, but it's an election within party that we know 5 years before who is going to win, who is going to rule China right now. Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang, a kind of candidate members in the party we know 5 years before. So there is no competition, there are no debates, about the course.
Okay,
So,
I mean, maybe those main faces have been, set in stone for a while, but I have to wonder when I look at the schedule of this Congress, this party convention. I was reading the Congress usually takes place in October. It was moved to November because there were difficulties in finding a consensus in the party on how China is to move forward. Now, that is a sign of a party that is torn inside and doesn't know which way to take the country. Couldn't that also be a reason for hope that reforms could come to the country?
will we be better when we knew before when the party convention will take place, because there's not like a U.S. election, 4 years before when you're going to vote for the next president. The Chinese party convention, normally it would be announced a date 1.5 months before or 2 months before. But this time, I've read reportedly the hotel reservation were made for mid of October. But I would see this party convention was very perfect timing, 2 days after U.S. election, because because series of scandals within the party.
Yes, such as Bo Xilai, for example.
Exactly.
And you don't think that the scandal surrounding him and his wife, you don't think that's having any effect on the change of leadership?
No, not any. They will clean up. As I said, they need a good reputation. They need a very good reputation in public image.
So this is PR window dressing that the new leaders are going to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Say.
So just more of the same, just different wrapping paper.
Yes, the paper are written 5 years before, so you know who it's going to do.
Yeah, I mean, it must be nice to have a crystal ball like that. I mean, obviously in Washington, D.C., no one has a crystal ball that works that well.
Yes.
Let's talk about the economy, though, for a second. I think that's probably where the Chinese are not as omniscient as they'd like to be. The GDP in China is now around 7-8%. Many economists are saying that more free market policies, more capitalism is needed to maintain that momentum and to prevent a downturn. And we know that the party is scared to death of a downturn. So will the party save itself by becoming more American? Yeah, you chuckle.
Capitalism is right now the normal situation in China would be to the country, is not a socialism, because the faith in socialism has damaged in the last decades. We see we are right now practicing a kind of socialism market economy, which is not a system, but you see this capitalism is not
it's
different.
It's capitalism without democracy.
Yes, because one party is ruling.
And what's your feeling? I mean, those are very, very tricky strings to manipulate, right? Mm-hmm. You have a growing middle class, people who have more and more material wealth.
Yes.
And Bill Clinton has told us many times that when people become wealthy, they also demand more rights. Because they have time to think about it.
Yes, because
isn't that also going to happen in China?
That's also the credo of the ex-Federal Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. He always says it's a kind of German Wandel durch Handel, changement through trade. But it never happens because, the middle class in China is growing and the party is also changing because they take the growing middle class, even they are capitalists, to the Communist Party. And they give them a share, whole country. They let them take part on the economic growth. So they get the growing middle class under control.
So the disparities between urban, rural areas, demographic problems, the treatment of minorities in the West and the South, all of those things that could be a powder keg. You don't think they will become too much for the party to control?
the party has to try to control everything. But to be frank to you, no party like the Communist Party is able to control the whole huge country. Yeah, because the conflict is huge. Not even the middle class, the poorest people, the migrants in the urban area, they're getting more trouble because they are losing their jobs.
So, all right, yes, I mean, that's a point of conflict.
Yeah.
All right, let me pull in Bilgin and Courtney here. I mean, when I hear this, you know, why would the world welcome this change? That I mean, this is more of the same. There's no reason to think that inside China things are going to get better.
Well,
Bill.
I mean, there's...
You're the political scientist here. Come on.
Yes.
Sure. I mean,
but with no regional expertise on China, though. But I mean, you know, there's so much public debate about China, where it's heading, what its internal problems are, particularly with regarding democracy. But I mean, when you look at its foreign policies that it's doing in the Middle East or in Africa, for instance, where it's getting more and more engaged, I find it that there are very interesting developments going on, right? I think there's a very very one-sided picture also of China, which I find deplorable. I don't know enough about now to contest this type of news reporting or this public conception about what China is or should be. But I am a little bit skeptical about this one-sided view of China.
Okay, but the Chinese government, the leadership, always talk about democracy is very important for this country. But there is a common misunderstanding when the Chinese leadership is talking about democracy. He means democracy is things I gave to you, I guarantee you. But not the common...
He's not talking about liberal democracy. He's talking about democracy within a one-party system.
Yes.
Which, of course, most people would...
There's no voting.
A political scientist would say that's not a democracy.
Yeah.
Right.
She's right.
It's not just formal democracy,
Right.
of course, in the
Of
world.
course,
That
exactly. Okay. This transition in power, some people have said that what we're seeing this week begin in China is actually, for the first time, more important than the U.S. presidential election. The rise of China. Courtney, I mean, you know, you're a Washington insider. Is that a reason to lose sleep at night?
I don't believe it's a reason to lose sleep at night, but I think it's an incredible, it is a statement that there's, I think, living as an expat now in Berlin and watching the more global news, that there's been such a focus on the U.S. election, whereas this is huge news, and this transition of power and what this next administration means for China, and the fastest growing economy, and I think it's been an undertold story to some degree.
But it's planned.
Impact.
I mean, it's like Hal was saying, right? The
it's
opaqueness
planned,
is planned.
But there are still questions as to what we will see, and I agree there is sort of a one-dimensional view of China that is out there, and I think there is hope for optimism. And we've had tremendous, between the Chinese and the American government in the past 4 years, some really important state visits and interactions of high-level officials on some topics that, you know, ranging from human rights to the environment, that I think have opportunity for hope and global development as well. So.
Okay. So China is still not to be feared, Hal, is what you're telling us.
Not actually. We don't have to fear China. You know, China, the economic power of China is huge. But there is a weakness of this whole country, which is political reform. That's why I'm talking abroad in Europe and in the United States to raise the pressure on the Chinese leadership. You do need a political reform, not for us, but for you.
Okay. All right. Well, that's a way to take us to the next thing. Speaking of reform and the lack thereof, some would say in Turkey. Turkey, I think we would all agree, has profited from the Arab Spring. Its influence in the Middle East and in the Arab world is stronger than ever, and it is seen as a role model for emerging democracies in Egypt and Tunisia. But inside Turkey, a decades-old conflict between the government and the Kurdish minority revealed a country unable to establish domestic peace and reluctant to protect the rights of minorities. Now, this week, that constant friction in the country turned bloody.
There were renewed clashes in southwest Turkey at the weekend after the funeral of a Kurdish militant killed during fighting with the Turkish army. Tensions have been particularly high in the mainly Kurdish region since hundreds of Kurdish prisoners went on hunger strike in September. The Armed Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, which is seeking autonomy, has stepped up violence in recent months with a series of attacks on military targets. The Turkish army is fighting back. The PKK, which is viewed as a terrorist organization by the EU and the US, first took up arms against Turkey in 1984. More than 40,000 people have died in the conflict. A Turkish military source has said that more than 100 soldiers and around 500 militants have been killed so far this year.
Okay, Bilgin, let's pick up on the hunger strikes that we're seeing by the Kurdish prisoners. How significant is this, and will it make a difference for the Kurds?
Well, it is definitely a very, very large pressure on the Turkish government.
But we've had it before. We had it in the 90s, right? A hunger strike.
There have been, unfortunately, hunger strikes happen have happened several times in recent decades, but this one is, since yesterday, has a much larger, different dimension, because since September, gradually, different groups of inmates, Kurdish inmates, have been joining the hunger strike. As of yesterday, 10,000 political prisoners have also now entered this hunger strike. This is one of the largest hunger strikes, not just in Turkey, but worldwide. So this is a very severe pressure and issue also.
How did we get to this new low point? Was it Erdogan supposed to be the leader to find a solution?
He said that he wants that he definitely until 2005, in 2005, he made several statements that he wants to solve this issue. In 2009, he initiated something called a Kurdish Opening, a democratic initiative, where he announced several reforms and, even apparently there were also some negotiations going on with the PKK at that point. But unfortunately, a few months later, after this initiative, everything turned upside down in December 2009 when a criminal investigation began against people affiliated with the legal Kurdish political party, BDP.
Right, the legal party, yeah.
It's a legal party.
Not the PKK.
No, BDP has 36 members in elected members in parliament. 8,000 people have been arrested since then, and that means actually really...
It smells like, a conspiracy there in the works. I'm also wondering, would the situation for the Kurds be different in Turkey today if the momentum for Turkey joining the European Union were stronger? Because that momentum has weakened.
It gave leverage. As long as the relationship between Turkey and the EU were progressing, and when the accession negotiations were opened in 2005, EU had some leverage on Turkey, definitely. But this has declined significantly. And I have to say that the EU has not taken a strong stance on the Kurdish conflict. In the 1990s, before Turkey became a candidate country in 1999, the EU was putting lots of pressure. This has changed, unfortunately.
But the European Union would not allow Turkey to join with the situation as it is right now for the Kurds.
Well, definitely.
And so it's actually in the Kurds' interest for this momentum to be there. So the Kurds are actually suffering because Turkey's moving away from Europe.
No, that is wrong. That is not the causality I would draw here.
But
the Kurds
it is collateral damage, though, right? For the Kurds.
The quality of democracy has been declining significantly ever since. It's going parallel with the decline and deterioration of EU-Turkey relations, which is going downhill basically since 2005, 2006. And I should maybe qualify something that you mentioned before when you referred to me, that there has been no reforms. There were reforms, particularly until 2005. The AKP government, Prime Minister Erdogan, undertook several steps, democratization reforms, which also related to an extension of Kurdish rights. But the hunger strike right now, two of the demands one of them relates to the recognition of Kurdish being taught in primary schools.
So it's the language,
mother tongue, teaching mother tongue. You know, it's actually a shame that you have to do a hunger strike for that.
What's so hard about that? Why is there not support for that?
Well, there has been since many years, this war has sustained a very nationalist discourse in Turkey. It is really difficult even to talk about these issues. And
but there again, we're back at what I asked you at the beginning of the show about identity, right? Is there a fear that if you give the Kurds an inch, they're going to take a mile?
That pretty much summarizes a little bit the stance by the government. But this is, of course, you don't do politics. I mean, you create fears in politics if you want to implement certain things, right?
As the PKK has done, for example.
Well, I mean...
And the more I read about the PKK, I ask myself, why doesn't the PKK try to become the Turkish IRA? And instead of being at war with the system, become a part of the system. Is that
this is why why I addressed this issue in 2009. The BDP, the Kurdish Legal Political Party, took as a role model Sinn Féin, right? But how can you do legal political struggle when basically, effectively, all the grounds for democratic action are being curtailed for you? How's that going to work? If you have, I mean, right now in prison, there are not only just activists supporting the party, the BDP, but elected mayors, human rights lawyers, lawyers, human rights activists, a very wide range of people who engage themselves by democratic means, politically, in a legal realm, but they're in prison, waiting trial.
What about the Syrian conflict? How does that further complicate the situation?
I mean, the Kurdish conflict is not Turkey's problem. It's a trans-regional issue. It dates back to the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire. It is not just an identity conflict, it's a territorial conflict also, right? You have, there was once a plan to have an autonomous Kurdistan, which was then elevated, and ever since then, you have a Kurdish conflict in the Middle East. It's the longest-standing ethnic conflict in the Middle East.
Would that be a reason, Courtney, if the United States wanted, in, let's say, a second term for Obama, if the United States wanted to be more proactive with the Syrian conflict, could it use the Kurdish situation as a backdoor?
This isn't an area of particular expertise for me, obviously.
Yeah, but we're looking into the crystal ball today.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
It's okay. There are no wrong answers today.
I know.
You know?
It's not an answer. It's just not an area I'm particularly well versed in, so I don't even want to. But this need, though, I mean, I'll pour you in on this. Isn't there a need for some sort of external pressure? Because, what I'm hearing here is that the status quo is going to stay just that unless something from the outside changes.
I do believe that the status quo is still dangerous regarding to Syria and Iranian issues. The whole world wishes a stable Middle East. We need a strong Turkey. We need a stabilized Iran. We need a stabilized Israel, where the next U.S. administration should calm Israel down to the Iranian nuclear program. So it's a problem of the Kurdish and part of the problem. This is all a problem of the Muslim world in the Middle East. So you cannot solve the problems as single. You have a whole view of those old problems.
And what about Turkey's standing in the Middle East and in the Arab world? The plight of the Kurds is not getting a lot of play.
Absolutely.
In the media, so...
Yeah, it's quite ironic, I mean, the popularity of Turkey increased in the Arab world after Erdogan's remarks and support for the Palestinian cause. Yeah. He has invited the Hamas leaders to Turkey, there's a Hamas office in Ankara, but he does not negotiate with the legal political party BDP at his own country. So this, a very diametrical stance on the one hand regarding to the Palestinian issue and then to the Kurdish issue at home, is quite, indicative about the possibility also, I think, for the aspirations to become also a larger regional player.
Do you think the Kurds in Turkey, would they accept and offer, recognition of the language, better conditions for Öcalan, who's in prison.
Right.
If that was granted, would they consider that a peaceful, negotiated solution?
Well,
no autonomy.
yeah, I think what this major, generally in conflicts like this, what you do is a negotiated settlement.
Yeah.
Right? That is not just giving, certain political rights and concessions, which are very important, of course, but to solve the conflict, to have sustainable peace, you have to sit down with the party you've been fighting with. And that is, so far, has been also the claim and the demand by both the hunger strikers and also various parties involved in the conflict. So certainly these steps that you just mentioned are the primary demands now by the hunger strikers, but there's another step to that, what will happen after that?
Yeah. What will happen after that? That is a good way to wrap things up. Okay, a straw poll. Very quickly before we end the show. Who is going to win the U.S. election? Courtney, I know.
We're feeling optimistic for President Obama's re-election.
Okay, Hal?
America is going to win. The whole country is going to win.
Oh my God, this is a Chinese, you're not a Chinese.
Always the middle way,
All right, what do you say?
I do want Obama to win because
Okay.
I want to criticize him more.
All right, very good. Well, that is going to round out the agenda for this hour. We'll be back with a special edition of Agenda once most of the ballots in the U.S. have been counted. I'll be joined by distinguished guests to cover the political spectrum from conservative to liberal to European. That's a special agenda early Wednesday morning here in Berlin to talk about the election results. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. We'll see you next time when I set the agenda.